It's crazy when you think about it, all the medical technology that's out there. But there's this whole specialized area for the littlest patients.
Yeah.
Like all these devices that are engineered just for kids to, to help their hearts and lungs keep going during really critical times.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a huge market. And what's really interesting is it's growing so fast.
It is, and that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today.
We're doing a deep dive into the global pediatric perfusion products market.
Right.
And you were kind enough to share a very comprehensive market report with me. And there's some fascinating stuff in there.
Yeah, really interesting trends starting to emerge.
Okay, so for anyone listening who might not be super familiar with this specific area, can you maybe just give us a quick, what are pediatric perfusion products?
Sure.
What are we talking about here?
So these are the tools that are used to support a child's heart and lung function during complex procedures. So you're talking about open heart surgery. You're talking about when a child needs ECMO, which is like that advanced life support.
Yeah. So think about things like oxygenators that add oxygen to the blood, filters that remove impurities, and cannulas, which are those small tubes that connect the patient to the machines.
Right.
All designed specifically for children.
So miniaturized in a lot of cases, right?
Yeah, the scale and precision is quite different from what you would see in adult medicine.
Okay.
And this report gives us a really detailed snapshot of where the market is now and, more importantly, where it's going. And our goal today is to kind of pull out the most significant insights for you so you can understand this really vital healthcare sector without getting too bogged down.
Awesome. So let's jump right in.
Okay.
What's the big picture? What's the overall market size and how much is it growing?
Well, the report says that the global market is expected to reach $640.2 million USD in 2025.
Wow. Okay. So that's a pretty good sized market already in 2025.
It is, but the really interesting part is the growth.
Oh, yeah. What are we looking at?
So by 2033, it's projected to reach $989.98 million USD.
So basically $1 billion by 2033.
Yeah, almost $1 billion.
So that's a compound annual growth rate, or CAGR, of 5.6% from 2025 to 2033.
So that's a healthy clip, right?
Yeah, that's substantial growth.
So what's driving this growth? I mean, what's making this market expand so rapidly?
The report highlights a couple of main factors. The first is the increasing prevalence of congenital heart defects.
Okay.
And then also just various pediatric cardiovascular diseases worldwide.
Yeah, unfortunately, more children are being born with these conditions or they're developing them later.
Right, and that often leads to surgical interventions or that advanced life support.
Which, of course, requires all of these specialized devices that we're talking about.
Exactly. So the greater need fuels the demand.
Makes sense now. Geographically, how does this market break down? Where is the demand the highest?
So right now, North America has the biggest share of the market.
Okay.
In 2025, they are projected to account for over 40% of the global revenue.
Wow, okay, so they're really dominating.
Yeah, big player. And the market size for them in 2025 is $256.08 million USD.
So how does their growth rate in North America compare to that global average of, was it 5-point-something%?
Yeah, 5.6.
Yeah.
So North America is a little bit more measured. They're projected to have a CAGR of 3.8% from 2025 to 2033.
Okay, so still growth, but just not as much as some other areas.
Right.
Which makes sense. I guess already such a large part of the market.
Right. They've got a bit of a head start.
So within North America, who are the major players?
Well, the United States is obviously the giant there.
Clear.
Their market size is $202.05 million USD in 2025.
Wow.
And their CAGR is actually a little bit lower. It's 3.6%.
Okay.
Canada follows with a market size of $30.73 million USD and a CAGR of 4.6%.
Oh, so they're actually growing a bit faster.
Right, a little faster than the U.S.
Interesting.
And then Mexico is $23.3 million USD with a 4.3% CAGR.
So the U.S. is the big player, but Canada and Mexico are actually growing at a faster rate.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So what's driving this growth across North America as a whole?
Well, the report points to a few things. There's the ongoing progress in pediatric healthcare in general.
Probably always getting better.
Yeah, they're really focused on improving patient outcomes for kids. And of course, there's continuous technological advancements.
Right. Always innovating, always trying to improve the devices.
Exactly. And then there's also a lot of government support and initiatives within the healthcare system.
Yeah. which makes a big difference in terms of funding and access.
Huge difference.
Okay, so let's move on to Europe. You mentioned they were the second largest market.
Yeah.
So how do they compare?
So Europe represents over 30% of the global revenue in 2025.
Okay,
And their total market size is 192.06 million USD.
got it. And what's their projected CAGR?
So from 2025 to 2033, their CAGR is 4.1%.
Okay, so pretty consistent with North America, a little bit higher.
Yeah, slightly higher, yeah.
All right, so let's break down Europe a little bit. How do the individual countries within Europe contribute to this overall market?
So there's some variation across the continent. The UK market is estimated at 32.27 million USD with a CAGR of 4.9%.
Okay.
Germany is at 38.03 million USD with a 4.3% KGR.
Got it.
And Russia is at 29.77 million USD with a KGR of 3.1%.
Okay.
Then you have France at 17.67 million USD with a 3.3% TGR.
Right.
Italy at 16.52 million USD with a 3.5% CGR.
Got it.
And Spain at 15.75 million USD with a 3.2% CGR.
Okay.
So pretty consistent growth rates across those.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
But then you also have some smaller markets like Luxembourg, which is 5.95 million USD with a 4.2% CGR.
Okay.
Portugal at 4.03 million USD with a 3.9% CGR.
All right.
And Greece at 2.3 million USD with a KGR of 4.4%.
Right. And then if you take the rest of Europe altogether, their market is projected at 29.7 million USD with a KGR of 2.8%.
So a lot of different moving parts in Europe, but overall it seems like there's pretty steady growth across the board.
Yeah, pretty consistent.
So what are the main things that are driving this growth in Europe?
It's similar to North America. The increasing incidence of congenital heart diseases
Right.
is a big factor, and then just the rising number of pediatric surgeries overall.
Makes sense.
And then, of course, the technological advancements are a key driver.
So better devices, safer devices.
Exactly, leading to better outcomes.
And Europe has a really well-established healthcare infrastructure, right?
They do, yeah. Strong healthcare infrastructure.
And a lot of government programs that support pediatric care.
Right, a lot of government initiatives.
And they also have a big emphasis on early diagnosis of these conditions,
Yeah, they're really focused on catching things early.
which can make a huge difference.
Huge difference.
Okay, so now let's look at Asia Pacific. You mentioned earlier that this region has the highest projected growth rate,
Right.
and that's always something to pay attention to.
It is, yeah. This is where things are really taking off.
Okay, so Asia Pacific currently accounts for around 23% of the global revenue,
Right, about that.
with a market size of 147.25 million USD in 2025.
Correct.
But what's really impressive is their key AGR.
Yeah, their CGR is projected to be 7.6% from 2025 to 2033.
That's a big number. That's huge growth.
It is. It's really rapid expansion.
So what do you think is driving that such a big difference compared to Europe and North America?
Well, I think part of it is just increasing access to specialized pediatric care in developing economies.
Right. So as these countries develop their healthcare systems,
Yeah.
they're able to provide more of these specialized services.
Exactly. And then there's also the fact that there may be a larger undiagnosed or untreated population in these regions.
Oh, interesting. So there's a lot of catching up to do.
Right. So that contributes to the rapid growth.
Okay, that makes sense. So which specific countries in Asia Pacific are really driving this growth?
Well, China is a major player.
Of course.
Yeah, their market size is projected to be 61.84 million USD in 2025.
Wow.
And their CAGR is 7.1%.
Got it.
And then India is another high growth market.
Yeah, India is growing really fast in a lot of sectors.
Their market is estimated at 17.67 million USD with a CAGR of 9.4%.
A 9.4%. Wow.
That's huge growth.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And then you have Japan, which is 20.32 million USD with a 6.1% CGR.
Okay.
South Korea is 14.72 million USD with a 6.7% CAGR.
Got it.
Australia is 7.66 million USD with a 7.3% CAGR.
Okay.
And then Southeast Asia as a whole is 10.16 million USD with a 8.6% CAGR.
So a lot of big numbers there.
Yeah. And then Taiwan is also contributing.
Okay.
They're at 4.71 million USD with a CAGR of 6.9%.
And what about the rest of Asia Pacific?
So a lot of activity, a lot of different countries contributing to this really strong growth in Asia Pacific.
Yeah, it's a dynamic region.
What would you say are the main factors that are fueling this impressive growth in the region?
Well, a few things are happening there, rising healthcare standards across many countries.
So as the economies grow, the healthcare systems are improving. Exactly, and that leads to an increase in the number of pediatric surgical procedures being performed.
Okay, so more surgeries, more demand for these devices,
Right, and then there are the advancements in medical technology.
which are happening globally, but they're having a big impact in this region.
Yes, and there's also a growing awareness of cardiovascular diseases in children.
So earlier diagnosis, earlier treatment.
Exactly, and then there are improvements in the healthcare infrastructure itself.
Right, better hospitals, better facilities.
Exactly, and then you also have government policies that are supportive of this type of care.
Right, so the governments are investing in healthcare.
Yes, and then there's the rising incidence of congenital heart defects being identified.
Which unfortunately is a global trend, but it's driving demand in this region.
Yes, and then finally there's even the growth of medical tourism in certain areas.
Oh, interesting. So people are traveling to these countries for specialized medical care.
Yeah, so all of these factors combined are really driving this significant expansion in Asia Pacific.
Okay, so a lot of different moving pieces, but a very positive outlook for this region.
Definitely.
All right, let's move on to Latin America.
Okay.
So what's the market size and growth outlook there?
So Latin America holds a smaller portion of the global market. They account for a little over 5% of the revenue in 2025,
Okay,
with a market size of 32.01 million USD.
got it. And what's their CAGR?
Their CAGR is projected to be 5% from 2025 to 2033.
Okay, so respectable growth.
Yeah, decent growth.
And who are the key players in Latin America?
Brazil is the biggest market in the region.
Makes sense.
Their market is estimated at 13.7 million USD in 2025,
Okay,
and their CAGR is 5.6%.
got it.
Argentina is next at 5.38 million USD with a 5.9% CAGR.
Yeah.
Peru at 2.62 million USD with a 5.62 million USD with a 5.62% CAGR.
Got it.
And Chile at 2.3 million USD with a 5.3% CAGR.
And how about the rest of Latin America?
So the rest of the region combined is projected at 5.15 million USD with a 4.1% CAGR.
So what are the primary factors driving this growth in Latin America?
Similar to other regions, the increasing prevalence of congenital heart diseases is a big factor.
Right. Unfortunately, it's a global issue.
It is. And then the growing pediatric population overall means there's a greater need for cardiac surgeries.
Right. More kids, more potential need for these interventions.
Exactly.
And Latin America's healthcare infrastructure has been improving, right?
It has. Yeah, there have been a lot of improvements in healthcare infrastructure.
So better hospitals, better facilities.
Right. And then there's also rising awareness of these advanced medical technologies.
So people are more informed about the treatment options.
Exactly. And hospitals are developing specialized pediatric units.
Oh, that's great. So more specialized care for these young patients.
Yes, definitely.
And the governments are playing a role as well, right?
Yes, there are government initiatives aimed at improving healthcare access.
So more funding, more resources.
Exactly. And funding for critical care is really important.
Absolutely. And minimally invasive techniques are becoming more common as well, right?
They are, yes. That's a growing trend.
Which is great because it means less invasive procedures, faster recovery times.
Right, better outcomes for the kids.
Okay, so that's Latin America. A lot of positive developments there.
Definitely a lot of progress.
Okay, finally, let's talk about the Middle East and Africa.
Okay.
So they currently have the smallest market share, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. They account for around 2% of the global revenue in 2025,
Okay,
with a market size of 12.8 million USD.
so a smaller market, but what about their growth?
Their growth is actually pretty respectable. Their EAGR from 2025 to 2033 is projected to be 5.3%.
Okay, so they're on an upward trajectory.
Yeah, they're definitely growing.
And where is this growth concentrated? Which countries or regions are really driving this?
So the GCC countries as a group are estimated at 5.48 million USD with an AGR of 6.1%.
Okay.
South Africa is at 2.02 million USD with a KGR of 6.3%.
Right.
Egypt is at 1.34 million USD with a KGR of 5.6%. Turkey is at 1.1 million USD with a CGR of 4.8%.
Got it.
And Nigeria is also at 1.34 million USD, but with a slightly lower CGR of 4.4%.
All right, and what about the rest of the Middle East and Africa?
So the rest of the region combined is projected at 1.51 million USD with a 4.3% CAGR.
Okay, so some variation within the region, but overall positive growth.
Yeah, definitely a positive trend.
So what's driving this growth in the Middle East and Africa?
One of the main factors is improvements in healthcare infrastructure.
Right. So as these countries develop, their healthcare systems improve.
Exactly. And there's a growing awareness of the need for specialized neonatal and pediatric care.
So people are recognizing the importance of having these services available.
Yes, and that's leading to an increase in demand for specialized medical equipment.
So the hospitals need the tools to provide these services.
Right. And then there's also a rise in the number of congenital heart defects being diagnosed.
Which again, unfortunately, is a global trend, but it's driving demand.
Yes. And then you have government investments in healthcare.
So the governments are putting more resources into the healthcare system.
Exactly, which is really important.
And hospitals are adopting more advanced technologies.
Right. So they're trying to keep up with the latest advancements.
And we're even seeing some medical tourism in this region as well, right?
Yes, some people are traveling to these countries for specialized care.
Interesting. So all of these factors are contributing to the market expansion.
Yes, it's a combination of factors driving the growth.
Okay, that's a really comprehensive overview of the market by region.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
All right, so now let's shift gears and talk about the types of products that make up this market.
Okay.
So what does the report say about market segmentation by product type?
So the report highlights that pediatric oxygenators are the dominant product segment right now.
Okay, so these are the devices that add oxygen to the blood.
Right. And they're essential for cardiac surgeries and ECMO procedures.
And they're specifically designed for children, right?
Yeah. Yes. Their design is tailored to handle the smaller blood volumes and the delicate physiology of children.
So really important for managing those complex heart conditions.
Absolutely critical.
So that's the leading product segment. What about the fastest growing segment?
So the fastest growing segment is pediatric cannulas.
Okay, so these are the small tubes that are inserted into blood vessels,
Right, and they're essential for facilitating blood flow during surgery.
particularly heart surgery.
Yes, so the increasing complexity of pediatric surgeries is one factor driving the growth.
So as the surgeries become more complex, they need more specialized cannulas.
Right, and there's also a growing demand for smaller-sized cannulas.
Oh, that makes sense. So as the technology improves, they can make these devices smaller and more precise.
Exactly, and there's also ongoing innovation in cannula materials and design.
So always trying to improve these devices.
Right, always innovating.
Interesting. So oxygenators are currently leading the pack, but cannulas are definitely a segment to watch.
Yeah, they're the ones to keep an eye on.
What about other types of perfusion products that are part of this market?
So the report also mentions a few other important categories.
Yeah.
There are pediatric arterial filters.
And what do those do?
Those remove particulate matter from the blood.
Okay, so they basically clean the blood.
Right, make sure there are no impurities.
Got it. And then there are hemoconcentrators?
Yes, those are used to remove excess fluid from the blood during procedures.
Okay, so they help to manage fluid levels.
Right, and then there are reservoirs, which hold blood during surgery.
Okay.
And then there's just a general others category that encompasses a lot of other essential components.
So basically everything else that's needed for these perfusion procedures.
Exactly. A lot of different pieces involved.
All right, so we've talked about the products. Let's move on to who's using them. So from an end user perspective, what does the report tell us?
So hospitals are the dominant end user.
Okay, which makes sense, right?
It does, because they're the main centers for complex pediatric surgery.
Right, they have the operating rooms, they have the specialized equipment.
Exactly. They have the infrastructure for ECMO systems and heart-lung machines.
So naturally, they're going to be the biggest users of these perfusion devices.
Right. They have the highest demand.
And which end user segment is seeing the fastest growth?
That would be specialty clinics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So clinics that are focused on specific conditions.
Yes. So there's an increasing focus on specialized care outside of the traditional hospital setting.
Right. So maybe for certain conditions, it makes more sense to go to a specialized clinic.
Right. And these clinics often offer more advanced treatment options.
Okay.
So that increases their demand for specialized perfusion products.
So basically, a shift towards more specialized care is impacting the demand.
Exactly. It's a growing trend.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about who's using these products now. Let's talk about the market dynamics. So every market has things that drive its growth and things that can restrain it.
Right. Push and pull.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what does the report highlight in terms of these dynamics?
So on the driver's side, the first thing is just increasing healthcare spending globally.
Okay, so more money being allocated to healthcare overall.
Right. And there's a particular emphasis on specialized pediatric care.
So within that overall increase, there's a focus on making sure that kids get the care they need.
Yes, definitely. And then there's the rising demand for pediatric-specific surgical equipment.
So hospitals are realizing that they need equipment designed for kids.
Right, not just trying to adapt adult equipment.
And that's a big deal, right? Having equipment that's specifically designed for their needs.
Huge difference.
And then, of course, the advancements in perfusion technology are a major driver.
Right, these advancements are making the procedure safer and more effective.
Which ultimately leads to better outcomes for the patient.
Exactly. The goal is always to improve outcomes.
So those are all positive forces. What about the things that might hold back the market growth?
So the report identifies two main restraints. The first is the high cost.
Okay, that makes sense. These devices are complex, they're specialized, so they're probably not cheap,
They're not, and that can limit accessibility.
especially in countries with less developed healthcare systems.
Right, or for smaller hospitals that have limited budgets.
So cost is a major barrier.
It is a big barrier.
And what's the second restraint?
The second restraint is regulatory requirements.
Oh, okay, so the approval process for medical devices.
Exactly.
Now, those are obviously important, right?
Actually,
We want to make sure that these devices are safe and effective.
absolutely essential. But sometimes those regulations can cause delays.
Right, so it can take a long time to get a new device approved and onto the market.
And that can slow down innovation.
It can make it harder to get the latest technology into the hands of the people who need it.
Right. And the companies that are developing these products have to navigate those regulations.
So it's a balancing act between ensuring safety and fostering innovation.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the drivers and the restraints. What about the overall trends that are shaping this market as we look ahead?
Two key trends stand out. The first is the move towards minimally invasive technologies.
Oh, interesting. So less invasive procedures.
Exactly. And that's driven by the desire to minimize the impact on the patients.
Right, smaller incisions, faster recovery times.
Right. Potentially fewer complications.
So a lot of benefits to these minimally invasive approaches.
Definitely a big trend.
And the second trend.
The second trend is something we've talked about quite a bit, the rising prevalence of congenital heart defects.
Right, unfortunately, it's a global issue, but it's directly fueling the demand for these products.
Sadly, yes, the need is growing.
Okay, so those are the two big trends to watch: minimally invasive technologies and the increasing prevalence of these heart defects.
Yes, those are the ones to keep an eye on.
Okay, so we talked about the products, the users, the market dynamics. Now let's talk about the companies themselves.
Okay.
So what does the competitive landscape look like?
It's a very competitive market.
Okay, so a lot of companies vying for market share.
Yes, and the major players are really focused on innovation.
So they're constantly trying to develop new and better products.
Right, and they're also forming strategic partnerships.
Interesting, so companies working together
Yes, to leverage each other's strengths.
to bring new products to market faster.
Exactly, and we're also seeing some new companies emerging.
Oh, really? So startups entering the space.
Yes, and these startups are often focused on very specific pediatric solutions.
Oh, interesting. So they're finding niches within the market.
Right, they're identifying unmet needs.
So that's adding to the competition.
Definitely, it's becoming even more competitive.
And collaboration is important in this field as well, right?
Very important.
So companies working with hospitals and research institutions.
Right, to get feedback on their products and to develop new solutions.
So it's really a team effort.
It is, yeah.
Does the report highlight any specific examples of innovation?
It does.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It mentions the FDA clearance that XVIO received in July 2020.
Okay, and who's XVO?
They're a medical technology company,
Yeah.
and they got clearance for their kidney assist transport system.
Okay.
Now, this isn't directly a pediatric product, but it's an interesting example of innovation in organ perfusion technology.
So what does this system do?
It's a portable system that allows for continuous oxygenated perfusion of kidneys,
Okay.
and it can keep the kidneys viable for up to 24 hours during transport.
Oh, wow. So that's a big improvement over traditional methods.
It is, yeah, because traditionally they would just store the organs in cold storage.
Right. But this system keeps them perfused with oxygenated blood.
Exactly.
So it helps to preserve the organ.
And it's shown to improve outcomes.
That's amazing. And you said this wasn't directly related to pediatrics, but
Right, but it's an example of how innovation in one area can inspire developments in other areas.
so what works for adult organs could potentially be adapted for children.
Exactly. The principles can be applied.
Okay, that's fascinating. So XVIVO is one to watch. And who are some of the other key companies in this market?
The report lists a bunch of them.
Okay.
You have Medtronic.
Of course, big player.
Yeah, they're a leader in medical devices.
Okay.
And then there's Livanova PLC.
Yes.
Terumo Cardiovascular Systems Corporation.
Okay.
BL Life Sciences.
Got it.
Cardinal Health,
Okay.
Eurosets,
All right.
and getting AB.
So those are some big names in the medical device industry.
Yeah, a lot of experience in this field.
And the report also mentions confidential data and data hidden,
Yeah,
which probably means that there are some other companies out there that they're not disclosing.
right. Could be proprietary information or just companies that aren't publicly traded.
Okay, well, that's not unusual for these types of reports.
Right. Some information is always kept under wraps.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of information today. The overall market size, the growth, the breakdown by region, the different types of products, the end users,
We have a lot of ground.
the market dynamics, the competitive landscape.
Yeah, it's a complex market.
It is. So let's try to summarize the key takeaways for our listeners.
Okay, so the big takeaway is that this market is projected to grow significantly.
Right, that 5.6% CAGR is
Hmm.
pretty impressive.
It is, and that growth is driven by the increasing need for specialized pediatric cardiac care.
Right. Unfortunately, more kids are being born with these conditions or developing them. So the demand for these devices is only going to increase.
Sadly, yes.
And Asia Pacific is the region to watch.
Yeah, they're going to experience the most rapid expansion.
Although North America is currently the dominant force.
Right, they have a bit of a head start.
And in terms of products,
Pediatric oxygenators are leading the way.
but pediatric cannulas are the ones with the fastest growth.
Right, they're the up-and-comers.
Okay, so for you, the listener, if you wanted a quick but thorough overview of this market, I think we've given you that.
I think so. We've covered the key points.
A snapshot of where the market is and where it's heading.
We tried to pull out the most important information from that report.
And hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming.
Hopefully we made it digestible.
So that brings us to our final thought.
Okay.
We've talked about this incredible growth, particularly in regions like Asia Pacific and all the innovation that's happening.
Right.
So what do you think, what might be the next big technological leap in this field?
Ooh, that's a great question.
What could really change the game for these young patients?
I think artificial intelligence is going to play a big role.
Oh, yeah. AI is everywhere these days.
It is, and I think it could help to personalize treatments.
So tailoring the care to each individual patient.
Yes, exactly. Using data to optimize the devices and the procedures.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So AI-powered perfusion devices.
That's what I'm thinking.
Wow, that's a really interesting thought. Something to ponder for the future.
It is definitely something to watch.
Okay, well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive.
Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure talking to you as always.
Likewise.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.